Even as Israeli troops pull out of Gaza and a ceasefire comes into effect, the reality of a brutal siege remains. The end of this war may bring peace to Israelis, but for Palestinians, it leaves displacement and devastation. As the world's eye turns away from Gaza, we must remain vigilant in our support after such indiscriminate wreckage. Tonight is a rare opportunity. We get to listen and learn from someone who has lived through something that most of us can hardly fathom. Amr Sharab is a Palestinian rights and justice activist from Khan Yunis in the Gaza Strip. Amr has collaborated with numerous organizations to expose Israel's war crimes against Palestinian civilians, including his own family. Amr is a graduate of Middlebury College and is currently a graduate student at the Monterey Institute of International Studies. Amr has told his story at numerous college campuses, community gatherings, and interviews in international media, most recently with Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! We are honored to have him speak with us tonight. Please help me welcome Amr.
Thank you, Candace. Many thanks to JVP for hosting this event, and many thanks to you all for taking time from your Thursday evening. Today we want to talk a little bit about what's happening in Gaza, but to put it in context. At least 10,000 homes have been destroyed, and the count is going up now that people are reaching many of the areas that have been declared a no-go zone. About 44% of the area of Gaza has been declared a no-go zone. That is out of 360 square kilometers, or roughly about 200 square miles, about half of that was declared a no-go zone. These are densely populated areas where people were forced out and killed while they were running. At least 15 hospitals and 18 clinics have been damaged, either partially or fully. Tens of mosques have been bombed and destroyed. One of them is the Omari Mosque, the oldest mosque in all of Gaza. 2 churches have been targeted. Cemeteries have been bombed. Even the dead doesn't have peace. Medics who were doing their duty trying to retrieve the wounded and the dead were targeted, and several meds were killed in the line of duty. Ambulances have been targeted. Journalists have been targeted. Over 80 journalists have been either killed or wounded in direct attacks by Israeli Air Force or artillery shells. The disabled, the house that is used as a home for the disabled, have been directly targeted by Israel Air Force. Gaza's only power plant has been bombed. Kindergartens, 4 kindergartens have been bombed. Several schools have been bombed. And we all know that all of these schools have been used as shelters for the refugees who were forced out of their houses. Cafes, restaurants, water wells, and the water infrastructure, sewage treatment plants, factories, shops, trees, everything has been a target. Israel considers everything and everyone in Gaza a legitimate target. But beyond these numbers, we shouldn't get just too focused on the numbers. We have to remember that these are people. These are people like you and me. Each one with a story. Each one has a family. Each one has a mother and a father, a brother and a sister, a child, a kid, a nephew and a niece. They all have dreams. They all have hopes. They all have aspirations. They all wanted to live a normal life. They all wanted to go about their lives. And their only fault, their only crime, is that they are Palestinians. And that was a reason enough to kill them. With U.S. support, with U.S. backing, we all know that Israel, the United States, provides Israel with $3.1 billion in direct military aid annually. In addition to that, almost $1 billion has been funneled from the United States to Israel over the past month during the fighting. The Congress approved initially $600 million and then another $225 million, and then they agreed to replenish Israel's arsenal of artillery shells and mortar shells when they were close to running out. So the United States opened the strategic reserve, weapons reserve that keeps in Israel to the Israeli military and told them, go ahead, get more shells, kill more civilians. All that was happening. All that was happening while Secretary of State John Kerry was in the region, in the Middle East, to broker a ceasefire. I'm going to talk about some stories. Some of them are mine. And I'm going to talk about other people, people I know or people I don't know, who happen to be Palestinians from Gaza. And that was a crime enough to get killed or to get maimed or to lose their house. I'm going to share with you this post that one of my friends wrote. They posted it on Facebook. And imagine it's you. We have all heard about the warning calls that Israel makes to warn civilians to evacuate their houses. You get a phone call from the Israeli army telling you to evacuate your home because it will be bombed to shreds in 3 minutes. 3 minutes to say goodbye to your little piece of history on earth. Pictures of living martyred brothers and sisters, things you love like your chair, your books, your memoirs, and even smell of your own bed. All your habits of playing with trees outside your western window, your old clothes, your wife's gold, the savings of your life. Imagine all of that going in front of your eyes in 10 minutes or in 3 minutes. Then imagine the pain you feel, and you still cannot understand what to do. Now, you're taking your identification papers so that you leave your house and die 1,000 times. Or you can refuse to leave and die once. That has been the story of many, many, many families. At least the lucky ones who got the call. Others got the warning missile. A bomb, small bomb warning you that a larger bomb is coming. But for many, there wasn't even a warning. Entire families have been wiped out, either by airstrikes or by artillery shells, or by tank shells. There's another story I want to share with you here, or a couple stories. This man, Ali Abu Dhair, he's from Rafah. He was relieved to see someone from the local media interview him and listen to his story. It was a Friday. It was a Friday and they were in their house. and the bombs started dropping in his house. Bombs dropped in his house. It killed 21 members of his family, brothers, nephews and nieces, wives, sisters-in-law, grandkids. Ali and 2 of his grandkids were the only 2 survivors. They were trapped under the rubble for over 50 hours before anyone was allowed to reach them and extract them from there. He lives and wonders why. Another story is Sheikh Eid, or Abu Jihad. He lost 11 members of his family. His oldest son, Jihad, his other son, Omar, and his granddaughter, Sarah, were killed in the earlier days in an airstrike. Couple weeks ago, and that's actually last week, last Friday, they got the same call that you have to get out of your house because it's going to be bombed and consider yourselves warned. So he and his family all ran out to a mosque in the nearby to take shelter. And someone was passing by his house, and that person was targeted by a drone. Drone missile struck that passbyers. So Jihad and one of his sons, actually all of his family, ran to try to help him out. But then the house was bombed. So they ran back to the mosque. Now the mosque was bombed, and the missile exploded with shrapnels flying all over, wounding everyone in his family. Soon after, an ambulance came, and he put some of the heavily wounded members of his family in the ambulance, started moving, and was struck. He and the surviving members of his family were still waiting by the mosque. But meanwhile, his son Yusuf, his son Mahmoud, his Aya, his daughter-in-law, Ibrahim, Hazim, were all killed. Another ambulance came in an hour later to evacuate the bodies and to evacuate Abu Jihad. Now he lives as the only surviving member of his family after losing 11. And he wonders why. He wonders why. There's so many stories to tell. Before I continue, I just want to go back a little bit because we need to put things in context. Because what's happening in Gaza did not start today, did not start yesterday, it did not start a month ago, it did not start with the kidnapping of the 3 Israeli teens, it goes beyond that. To start understanding what is happening, we have to put things in context. Context that the media and the mainstream media often ignores and or chooses not to include. How often have we heard the word occupation associated with Gaza in the media? How often have we heard the word siege associated with Gaza in the media. All we hear is, oh, Hamas struck and Israel is fighting back. We're sorry for civilian losses, but Israel is doing what it can to defend its own people. But let's go back and understand the context. What is happening in Palestine, occupied Palestine, is systematic disposition of land. Disposition of the land and the rights of the indigenous population. It is very similar to what happened in this very country with the Native Americans, with the indigenous tribes that were disposed of their land. And now they're reduced to live in reservations. The once proud indigenous nations were now reduced to live in reservations. This is their land, used to be their land, this is their land. And what Israel did is not too different. And what they're trying to turn Gaza into is to turn Gaza into a reservation. Maybe that's the special bond between the U.S. and Israel that we hear about all the time. Shared bond of disposition, of discrimination, and denying indigenous rights. Shared bond of ethnic cleansing and genocide. That's the shared bond. Not too long ago, we often hear another phrase that we hear in the media associated with what's happening in Gaza. The ones who try to be understanding or claim to be understanding, they speak of centuries of bloodshed and never-ending conflict. This is misleading. There hasn't been centuries of bloodshed and conflicts between Palestinians and Jews, or Arabs and Muslims and Jews. To the contrary, Arabs, Muslims, and Jews live, for the most part, in harmony and in peace. They lived together for centuries. When Jews were suffering from horrible anti-Semitism and pogroms in Russia, in Eastern Europe, in Western Europe, and even in the U.S., Jews and Muslims were living in harmony in the Arab world under Muslim rule. When the Reconquista happened in Spain, and Muslims were kicked out of Spain, both Muslims and Jews fled together. They both fled together to Morocco and Northern Africa. So, it's not about centuries. This started at the very end of the 20th century, of the 19th century, with the foundation of the Zionist movement. Zionist movement that determined to establish a Jewish home in Palestine, a Jewish state that's only for Jews, where only Jews would have rights. Everyone else would not have rights or would not be treated as a first-class citizen. And to establish that, they had to get rid of the indigenous population, either by killing them or by forcing them out. And it happened while in the very beginning of the 20th century, the indigenous Jews represented about 2% of the population of Palestine, who lived with Palestinian Christians and Muslims together in harmony. Then came the Zionist Jews from Eastern Europe, from Ukraine, from Poland, from Russia, not to seeking refuge in Palestine, but seeking to kick out the indigenous population and take their place, to establish a Jewish state for the Jews. And then the State of Israel was established in 1948, building on ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian population. Over 400 Palestinian villages were destroyed. Over about 700 Palestinians were forced out of their land, and some of them literally thrown into boats into the sea. And the name Palestine was literally wiped off the map. And in 1967, Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza Strip, as well as the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights, and then started building settlements, Jewish-only settlements, and taking Palestinian land and building Jewish-only settlements, taking Palestinian land and building Jewish-only roads to connect the Jewish-only settlements, trying to push and corner the Palestinian population and take more and more and more land. In 2005, Israel said, we're pulling out of Gaza and the Palestinians are free now. They can do what they want to do. They can live freely. We're not occupying them anymore. But Israel maintained full control of Gaza's borders, except one side with Egypt, who has been cooperating with and aligning with Israel in that regard. Israel had full control of Gaza's airspace, and Israel had full control of Gaza's coastline. And basically, Israel turned Gaza into an open-air prison, the largest open-air prison in the world. If you are in there, you cannot go out. If you're out, you cannot come in. Well, you can, but it's extremely hard. I used to joke with people who tell me, oh, well, how can you go home? So I tell them, well, that was around 2012, 13, when the change in Egypt happened. And then I tell them, it used to be next to impossible to go home. Now, it's just extremely hard. And now it's back to next to impossible again. What the siege does to Gaza is it's suffocating people. Israeli officials stated blatantly that we are putting Gazans on a diet. They cynically calculated that we are going to allow 2,000 calories per day per Palestinian to enter Gaza. They want to keep people alive, but not much more. What's on the list of banned materials? That changes. Some materials get allowed sometimes, and then they dropped and changed. But some of the materials, gasoline, natural gas for cooking and domestic use, construction material, medicine, medical equipment. That includes anything from Advil to chemotherapy to dialysis machines to MRI repair parts to X-ray machines, sometimes needles, bandits. They all at one point or another get banned for security reasons. Pens, pencils, paper. Remember when my sister wasn't still in college, the professors would tell them to bring their own papers for the purpose of printing for the exam, because you cannot find paper in the market. Oftentimes you cannot find wood to build desks for students and to build chairs for students. Sometimes you cannot go buy a notebook for your kid in school. What the siege means for Gazans, that some people get full scholarships to some of the top universities in the world, to Harvard, to Oxford, to Cambridge, to MIT, to UC Berkeley, scholarship worth 100 or 200,000 or 250,000 for undergrad, for masters, for PhD. And you cannot go, you cannot take it, because you are locked in Gaza. What it means, you lose your loved ones and you cannot see them. Cannot go see them. I personally, for natural or unnatural causes, over the past 10 years, have lost my 2 grandmothers, my dad, 2 brothers, 6 cousins. And I never had the opportunity to attend any of their funerals, or to pay my goodbyes to them, to pay my last respects to them, to kiss their foreheads before they are laid to rest. Because I, as a Palestinian, am not allowed to go back to my hometown, also for security reasons. Everything is controlled by the siege. Gasoline for the power plant is not allowed in. Repair parts for water purification equipment is not allowed in. Construction material and machines for the sewage treatment plants are not allowed in, which means that a lot of the sewage does not either gets pumped immediately pumped into the sea before it's treated because there's no capacity to process it, or it soaks into the ground and gets mixed with the water in the aquifer. And water-carried diseases are responsible. The stats showed that in 2010, waterborne diseases were solely responsible for about 33% of all diseases in Gaza. What the siege means, I came here from Washington, D.C., what's that, couple hundred miles? All I had to do is hop on a train or a bus, in this case train, and 3.5 hours, 4 hours later, I'm here. To go to Jerusalem, which is maybe with traffic and everything, and if it's a normal drive, would take, I don't know, Jessica, you have done the drive, what is it, 40 minutes, 50 minutes? An hour almost. All right, for me or for anyone in Gaza, that would take forever, because you cannot go there, period. Only actually been to Jerusalem once in my life. So that siege has affected everyone in Gaza. Makes living your normal life impossible. And to put on top of that siege is the frequent and recurring Israeli attacks and incursions and wars and assaults. 2002, 2003, 2004, 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2012, 2014, and keeps going. Every time unspeakable war crimes are committed, we rush out, we start protesting and demonstrating in the streets, and then the media starts reporting on it. Not very well, but it makes it there. And then there's a ceasefire happening one way or another, which Israel inevitably violates. But it happens and then it disappears from the news. What these assaults do, they kill people quickly. And it's all over the news now because it's not 1 or 2 or 5 Palestinians who are dying. It's not 10. It's 100 a day, 150, 200 a day. And it finally is a newsworthy story. News producer in one of the channels in New York City once told me that, oh, Palestinian dying, that's not a newsworthy story. Very blatantly. So now that there's a ceasefire, now the assault in Gaza is yesterday's news. It disappeared off of the front page. It's not there yet. And that's the purpose why a lot of people were saying, okay, let's have immediate unconditional ceasefire. You cannot have a ceasefire without ending the siege. Because the siege is criminal. The siege is inhumane. The siege is killing people. Between 2007 and 2010, at least 1,000 people died because of the siege, because of the lack of medical treatment, because of the siege. That's in 3 years. And the numbers are going up and going up. Some people want the ceasefire to happen, and they want to go back to the status quo ante and say, because now, oh, it's disturbing some people's sleep or disturbing their morning coffee when they see the pictures of dead babies on the news. They're saying, go back to dying slowly and get off of our screens. Go back to your ghetto in Gaza, die slowly, die quietly. You are disturbing us. And that cannot continue. This is not a normal life. I, as a Palestinian, have the right, I have every right to go visit my family when I please. I, as a Palestinian, have the right to have 24 hours of electricity in my house, not 2 hours a day if I'm lucky, or 8 on a wonderful day. I, as a Palestinian, have the right to have clean running water in my house. A few days ago, I was talking to my sister. They get an hour or two of running water every 3 or 4 days, and they're actually in one of the less affected areas. Some areas haven't had water in over 10 days. But they were all sick. My sister, my mom, my brother, my sister-in-law, and my 18-month-old nephew. They were all sick because sewage got mixed with the water. It's coming out of people's taps. It's not that they're drinking it, because the water in Gaza, the running water, is not good for human consumption. You have to actually buy purified water by the jug. But they were all sick. I really worry about my nephew. Could be diarrhea. They all have diarrhea, but could be dysentery. It could be cholera. God knows what it is. They don't deserve that. I, as a Palestinian, have the right, every right, to be safe in my house. You know, we have a farm, we used to have a farm in Al-Fukhari near Khan Yunis, which is close to the borders, about 1,800 feet from the borders. What was destroyed a few days ago. But that farm has come over the past few years under constant shooting from Israeli soldiers in the border posts by heavy machine gun fire, going through the walls, going through the windows, going through the furniture, smashing the glass, smashing books, smashing glasses. And that's a normal occurrence. Every house in Gaza that is close enough to the border, close to the border that could be anywhere between 1,000 to 3,000 feet, or any house that's close to the beach comes regularly under fire from Israeli border posts and from Israeli gunships. Constant and arbitrary and random shooting. And you know what? That doesn't even get reported, doesn't get documented, because nobody bothers to document it. Remember the last time it happened, my dad and my sisters were calling up everyone, like local human rights organizations, international human rights organizations, call the media, come, document this, write about it, and some people hang up on them, others told them, well, we don't have time to do this, otherwise this is what we would be doing every day. This is not normal life. And this doesn't get reported in the media. Is it normal to have your house shot at regularly and no one bothers to talk about it? Or is it because they're Palestinians? That's a question we have to ask. There is an element of discrimination, there's an element of racism. If Palestinians were doing this to Israelis, it would be all over the news. But because it's the other way around, it's not newsworthy. Want to wrap up because I know you guys, it's warm here, you must be getting tired, and then we can have questions and conversations, but I want to give a quick personal account of something that happened to my family. Some of you might have heard it before. About 3 weeks ago, I lost a cousin. He was visiting some of his friends, who lived a couple blocks away. Normal Ramadan evening, he left their house at 1, started walking home, and he was targeted by a drone. His lower half was shredded to pieces. Couple hours later, his friend's house was also bombed. And 2 of his friends were killed, and everyone else in the house was wounded. No one at the time knew what happened to Muhammad, and it was dark, he's on the side of the road, no one had any idea. But his dad rushed to the neighbor's house to help evacuate the wounded in fear of having another airstrike on the house. His dad was mad with him, saying, "Where is Muhammad? Why isn't he helping us in this bind?" And then a couple hours later, when the lights started coming out, they saw his body on the side of the road. What? They saw his body on the side of the road. 22-year-old young man. His parents' eldest. Very bright and young, very bright and energetic young man was killed for no apparent reason. A week later, house for my second cousin's family was bombed. Initially, we heard that no one got hurt. Or actually, initially we heard 3 cousins were killed, or 3 people, the report was 3 people got killed, several wounded. And then the next account that came out that no one got hurt. Breathed a big sigh of relief. Next morning, I read the news about my cousin's funeral. The day after was a ceasefire for 12 hours or so, and the rescue teams managed to extract the bodies of 2 more cousins from under the rubbles. They were minding their own business in their house. when they were hit. In 2012, my sister got wounded. Nothing targeted their house, but there was an attack in their block that shattered the glass of every house in the block, including her apartment, and a big shred of glass went through her arm. Back in 2009, two of my brothers were murdered with cold blood. They were driving home from our farm during the ceasefire time, and they were shot at by Israeli soldiers who knew them very well. They knew they were civilians, and they shot at them. They shot without warning. They denied an ambulance to go rescue them. And they literally lit my brother. My brother Kassab was hit. They shot at the car. My dad ducked. The car hit a wall. He was already struck with a bullet in his left arm. He ducked. The car hit a wall, and the soldiers shouted at them and ordered them to get out of the car. They got out. My brother Kassab got out of the passenger seat, and he was struck with a hail of bullets. Later, we realized there were 18 bullets across the chest, stomach, and arms. My brother Ibrahim got out of the car, and he was immediately hit with a bullet in his left leg, under his knee. The soldiers occupied a civilian house that overlooked the road and they could see them, they could shout at them. They were about 100 or 120 feet away. Soldiers refused to provide them with any help. Not a bandit, not a glass of water, not a blanket, nothing. They were shot at around 1 p.m. on Friday. The soldiers refused to allow ambulances to come through. And Ibrahim passed away around midnight, almost 11 hours later. He bled to death in his dad's arms. While my dad watched helplessly. And my dad was left there for another 12 hours until Israel allowed an ambulance to go through. They were just under a mile away from one of the largest hospitals in Gaza. If they were allowed to crawl to the hospital, they would have made it. But the soldiers refused to do that. Soldiers were occupied a civilian house, and they took 11 of the residents and neighbors as hostages, as human shields in the house. One of those residents spoke Hebrew and overheard the communication between the soldiers and their commander. When the soldiers saw the car approaching, they informed their commander that we see a civilian car coming. What should we do? And the commander said, shoot. Soldier wanted to confirm, shoot, and the commander said, shoot, shoot to kill. And they did. And then the soldiers were deliberating later with their commander. They had a medic within the unit. And they asked the commander, should we give them some medical help? And the commander said, no, we don't want, they're civilians, we don't want the story to get out. Let them die. And they did. Exactly, because I spoke with my dad and managed to speak with my dad. That's once he was transferred to the hospital. And he told me he wrote the story in details, all the gruesome details from his hospital bed. And he told me, I want you to get the story out. I want everyone in the world to know what they did to us. I want everyone in the world to know how they killed your brothers. We don't deserve this. And they should be held accountable. And I'm trying to follow through with what he asked me to do and to tell the story to everyone and anyone who would listen. And I remind everyone that this is one story of thousands, many of which are much more painful and much harder and have claimed many more lives. The one advantage we have to get our story out is I happen to be in this country, I happen to speak this language, and I happen to know people who connected me with other people who connected me with other people. But I remind everyone when they hear that story that this is one of many stories. Picture everyone. Picture all these grieving moms and dads. Picture all these grieving brothers and sisters. Picture all these grieving kids. And remember, everyone has a story. Every one of those stories deserves to be told, and every story deserves to be heard. And I'm only doing a small part, doing what I can, but hope you listen, and I hope you remember these words, and I hope you try to learn about more stories, more people, and try to do things. And because yes, we need to educate ourselves and learn what's happening and then educate people around us, but then we need to spring to action because we need to stop this insanity. We need to stop the war crimes. We need to end the siege. We need to end the killing. We need to end the occupation. And we have to hold the war criminals accountable. They cannot go on with this. There are many things we could do. We can call BDS, boycott, divestment, sanction, has been very effective. Boycott, divestment, sanctions is a movement that was called for by the Palestinian civil society back in 2005. It wasn't taken seriously when it started. 9 years later, it has made leaps and bounds. That Israel is trying to label BDS as anti-Semitism and has criminalized BDS and any Israelis of taking part in BDS within Israel. BDS has proved successful to end the apartheid regime in South Africa and can be successful to end the apartheid regime in Israel. That's one thing we can do. Another thing is we can call the Congress, call the administration to launch an investigation into Israel's actions and into Israel's war crimes. The U.S. was the only country that voted against the Human Rights Council resolution to launch an investigation about Israel's actions in Gaza. And I want to use their own words. The administration was saying when the illegal spying program was revealed, they were saying, if you don't have anything to hide, why are you afraid? You don't have anything to worry about. So if we need to tell them, if Israel has nothing to hide, then they have nothing to worry about. Thank you all, and I know I spoke too much, but thank you for listening.
We're going to do question and answers, and we're going to ask that you're respectful of our speaker and of the space, and that you limit your statement and your question, or hopefully a question, to less than 2 minutes. And please say who you are.
Thank you. My name is Bob Herbst. I have two questions. I wonder whether you could address the question of resistance, Hamas's role and the Palestinian resistance, why rockets as opposed to more nonviolent methods, whether that would work. And also if you could address what some of the Israeli arguments are that we've heard that Hamas has taken cement and used it in tunnels, and that it has hidden itself and fired from areas of where civilians are, houses and shelters and so forth.
So I want to actually jump to that the second question first, then go back to the first. But so Hamas, their story is not even adding up. So Hamas built tunnels. They're hiding up in the tunnels. So we are going to kill the civilians instead. So if they're hiding in the tunnels underground, why are you targeting the houses of the civilians and the hospitals and the ambulances and the cars and the motorbikes and the huts and the restaurants and the cafes? If they're underground, why are you bombing the civilians when you know that Hamas is underground? So you can argue that Hamas is building these tunnels underground to defend the civilians, to not give Israel any excuse to attack the civilians. They're saying, we're not here. Why are you bombing the civilians? So you can look at it as Gaza is very densely populated, and wherever they go, it's going to be possibly close to civilian centers. So they decided, we're going underground. So why are you bombing above ground? That's a question to contemplate and to consider. Sorry, I lost my train of thought here, but so Hamas has actually in this war, and it's not, let's be clear, it's not only Hamas, it's the Palestinian resistance. All Palestinian factions have been involved in this, and they are fighting against Israeli occupation. The right to resist an occupation is guaranteed by international laws and conventions. If the Mexicans or the Canadians or the Chinese or the Russians invaded the U.S., we're not going to sit here and watch them kill our kids. We're going to do whatever is necessary to fight back. And as for the nonviolent resistance, it's also, it's there, but how can in Gaza, you're locked in the ghetto, you're totally locked out, with people shooting at you at will whenever they feel like it, from the sea, from the land, from the air, almost every day, and you cannot even see them or touch them. How are you going to resist nonviolently against them? Are you going to protest against them? They're not. They're not even going to see you. You're going to go on strike? They don't care. Especially in Gaza, it's really hard. But then in the West Bank, you see nonviolent resistance every day. You see demonstrations, weekly demonstrations in villages that the apartheid wall is taking and is dividing. And they're faced with tear gas, rubber-coated bullets, and live ammunition. People get wounded every week in the West Bank going into nonviolent demonstrations. Israel is going after also nonviolent resistance because it's hurting, so that they're labeling BDS as anti-Semitism. If you boycott Israel, you're an anti-Semite. If you criticize Israel for killing children, you're an anti-Semite. What are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? And all the Palestinian people saying is, let us live in peace. Live and let live. Is that too much to ask? Just one little thing on the tunnels. That first of all, most of the tunnels in Gaza used to be commercial tunnels to allow people and goods and services to go through into Gaza. And there was actually a Bureau of Tunnels at first that regulated and taxed everything that comes in and out through the tunnels, because that was the lifeline of Gaza. Everything came from live cattle to cars came through the tunnels. And then there were the resistance tunnels separately, and they were set separately, and they were away from the civilians. We're going underground, so why bomb it? I was actually watching a translation of a talk show on Israeli TV the other day, and they were saying, the commentators or the analysts were saying, the Air Force is complaining. They are saying, we don't have any targets on the above ground. They all disappeared in the tunnels underground. What should we do? And then the other guy said, well, what to do? Maybe we can tell them, Yalla Hamas, come on guys, come up, come on the ground so we can kill you. So, and one last thing on this question. I was talking with my sister. She had a moment of zen the other day. She was being philosophical like 3-4 days ago, and she said, well, next time they want to go after the tunnels have openings in outside of Gaza, so why don't they shut down the tunnels from those openings, destroy the tunnels from those openings, and save yourself the hassle and save yourself the trouble? Why didn't they do that if it is about the tunnels? And as for the rockets, the Palestinian resistance stuck to primarily fighting military, and they would get in fights with the military. They kill military, and Israel would respond by shelling entire neighborhoods randomly. And they have admitted it. We would shell the neighborhoods to reduce the fire on our troops. 3 Israeli civilians, or 3 civilians were killed on the Israeli side. One was a foreign worker, another was a Bedouin citizen of the state of Israel, and he was killed because Israel, as a state policy, decided that no shelters or sirens will be built in Bedouin or Arab areas. State policy. And the third person who was killed is a civilian who came to a military base and was bringing chocolate and dessert and food for the soldiers to cheer them up and tell them way to go. And he was killed inside the military base.
And so I know maybe it's a silly question, but I think the Jewish voice is so powerful, and especially these young Jews who are educated and they're good people, and I want to understand why they continue to support Israeli policies. And what I want to ask you is, what do you think is the best way for us to speak to the Jewish community, especially young Jews who have a lot of power, and how to get them to sort of see the truth?
So I think the best way to go about it is to go on a human level, personal level. First of all, one question I have come to find very effective is to ask someone, do you think a Palestinian life and an Israeli life or an American life have equal value? That should be the opening question. If they tell you no, the Israeli life is worth more, then They have embarrassed themselves and they have revealed themselves. They showed their true face as hateful bigots, and there really would be no place to talk to them, and would be a waste of time. If they say yes, or they start pondering the question and tell you yes, then you can talk to them and try to connect with them on a human level. The Palestinians in particular, but Arabs and Muslims in general, have been demonized and dehumanized in this country for so long.
I guess I'm just curious if you're okay, but by what I mean by that is like when you get on a plane or you check more than another person would be checked, and what the general environment is like for you in the United States.
Thank you, first of all. It's weird. I guess I have thick skin now, so I don't notice it as much, but walk with my girlfriend, she's from Utah. We walk down the street, and she's always commenting about people giving us weird looks and dirty looks. So I don't notice it as much, but she does. Another thing is I have a rule when I fly. I try to dress up in a suit to look more presentable, and that has been helpful somewhat. And then another thing I do now is I do not check any luggage. Whenever I check a luggage, I always find that sheet of paper that says your luggage has been inspected and screened and hand opened and so on. So I try to skip it and I try to blend in, but yeah, you have the dirty looks on the subway, you have it when you're walking in the street, at the airport. But honestly speaking, at the airport, I haven't been randomly selected for inspection as much. So you have to develop a thick skin. Sometimes we think about, we live in a free country, we have freedom of speech, but if you talk, if you look different, if you walk different, then you are subject for discrimination. And so not only if you're Arab or Palestinian, if you're African American, if you're Hispanic, this is New York. This is the land of Bloomberg's stop and frisk. What is it, over 1 million cases in the past 3 years? It's not just a Palestinian or Arab. Any person who looks different or a member of a minority is a subject for discrimination and extra screening and inspection. That shows us it's not a struggle it's not about religion or anything. At the end of the day, all of these issues are interconnected. It's all about civil rights and human rights. It's all about discrimination and a system of structural and systematic discrimination.
But in many conversations with the Sephardic, they related how they were thrown out of Arab countries. This brings me to the fact that on the internet, a rationale that a lot of Jews and a lot of other people, fundamentalist Christians, are using for what happened in 1947 is that Jews, I think they're saying 780,000 Jews were thrown out of Arab countries. I was wondering if you could relate to that and if you could give your take on that, how one would respond to that.
Well, yeah, these are one of, it's another one of those arguments, one of the disparate arguments now. First of all, first there were no Palestinians, and then by consequence no Palestinian refugees. And now, as a last throw of the dice, yeah, there were Palestinian refugees, but it balances out. Palestinians left Israel, and Jews left Arab countries, so it balances out. That's the logic being given. The answer is many of the Jews in the Arab countries were not forced to leave. Actually, Israel worked very, very, very hard to lure them in, provided all sorts of incentives and had all sorts of operations to try to convince them to leave these countries and come to Israel, because they wanted immigrants, they wanted people to come and to displace the Palestinian population. So Israel primarily lured many of these people into Israel, and they provided they wanted them to come, and that's very well documented and very well established. That's number one. Yes, some of the Jews in Arab countries were subjected after the creation of the State of Israel and the Nakba in 1948 war. There were incidences of anti-Semitism, but they were limited, and that's also well established. Number three, even if we go along with the line that, we forced Palestinians out and Arabs forced Jews out, so it balances out. First of all, Israel is not, two wrongs do not make a right. Number one, even if we're gonna go with that argument. Second of all, Israel does not equal Jewish, and Jewish does not equal Israel. Israel does not represent these people. They are individuals, and they can represent themselves, and they can speak up if they want to. Number three, why put the Palestinians in the middle? So you force us out, and you're saying Iraq forced Jews out, so why put the Palestinians in the middle? Or is it all Arabs the same? You pay for the fault of the Iraqis or the Egyptians or the Yemenis. Even if we say their argument, they have a point there and it's valid, but it's not the Palestinians' mistakes. The Palestinians didn't do it. Why should we suffer? So we suffer the sins of the Nazis. The Nazis committed the Holocaust, and we lose our land and we get displaced from our land. Arguably, the Iraqis forced out the Jews, so now Palestinians also cannot go back to their land. How does that balance out? I don't get it. And then, how much sense does it make? So you, as a Jewish person in this room, can hop on a plane tonight from JFK, is it JFK or LaGuardia that flies into Tel Aviv? Arrive into Tel Aviv and get an Israeli passport on the spot. But you, as a Palestinian, whose your father or grandfather was forced out of their land, cannot go back because, there isn't enough space. 2/3 of Gaza's population are refugees who were forced out of their land, mostly from the southern parts of Israel. And they cannot go back. How does that square up?
Thank you all for coming tonight, and thanks, Amr, for the wonderful evening. It was really beautiful.